That was so sweet. Thank you all for joining me tonight. Thank you, Kea, for that generous introduction and for nominating me. And thank you to all of the students who have granted me this incredible honor of delivering this year's last lecture. Creating a last lecture has certainly been the ultimate homework assignment. As an educator, you, the students, have now turned the tables on me. I'll admit that I was in total disbelief when I learned that I was selected to give this lecture, especially since, hopefully, this is closer to my first lecture than it will be to my last. But with all of that aside, this has truly been a gift to be able to prepare and deliver a lecture like this. I've had to create the space to really critically think about who I am and how I hope to evolve. Something I really appreciate about Gen Z is that they're always trying to help us be more mindful, be more introspective. And this is a big way in which I'm learning from the next generation. My grandmother, my mom's mom, my nani, used to love to say, "You can't ever say you've won, not until you're on your own deathbed." I take this to mean that it's not a good idea to be too prideful because you never know what's going to happen next. So of course, at this point in my life, I can't give you a recipe or the perfect protocol on how to live a life of passion and purpose. But I can tell you a little bit about how my passions and purpose have evolved and how they've been influenced by my family's history, where I come from, and who I hope to be. Many people consider their parents to be their original heroes, and I am no exception. I have had the incredible privilege of being raised not just by two remarkable parents, my mother and my father, who are here today, but also my grandmother, who was my father's mom. My grandmother was born in Sindh, shown here in green, to her parents Lalibai and Kim Mulchandani in 1936 in a region called Sindh. My grandmother was incredibly bright and hardworking, and she was commonly at the top of her class. In Sindh at that time, classrooms were often combined such that one classroom had several levels, and a lot of times there would be friends, neighbors, siblings, cousins, all in one classroom. And despite being on the young side in her class, my grandmother excelled. And she was such a good student that she was once selected to dole out punishments by hitting students across the hand with a ruler, and once even had to hit her own cousin. Granted, this was 100 years ago, right, when rulers were favored over remediation. But my grandmother, again, incredibly bright. But in 1936, all of that changed. Sorry, in 1947, all of that changed. My grandmother had dreamt of being a principal or maybe an educator of some sort. But when the British Raj ended in 1947, people started to move a lot during this transition. While religions had historically coexisted relatively peacefully prior to British occupation, the decision for the partition of India and Pakistan tragically increased tensions between Hindus and Muslims. In the months following Indian independence, on August 15th, 1947, there was a sudden mass migration. Nearly 15 million people started crossing borders to a safer life in their religious majority. But there was a huge loss of life in the violence that inevitably erupted as people were suddenly forced out of their homelands, suddenly forced to leave everything behind. And it is estimated that 10% or 1 to 2 million refugees lost their lives in the violence that ensued during this transition. My grandmother Chandra, shown here, lost a lot during this time. She was 11 years old during partition, and by the time she was 19, she had lost 2 siblings, was married, had a child, and was widowed. With only a 4th grade education, my grandmother was financially dependent on the people around her, primarily the men. Because of all of this, my grandmother was laser focused on making sure the next generation, especially the women, were independent and therefore educated. So despite coming from a more traditional upbringing, my grandmother would always say, "Benje peren sa bien zaruri hai." It is necessary for you to stand on your own 2 feet. This was her mission, to foster stability and encourage independence in the next generation, and she did everything to support this. My grandmother made many sacrifices, and one of the biggest sacrifices she made was letting go of her son when he was 15 years old so that he could pursue a better life in the United States, even if that meant that she would be alone in India for the foreseeable future. I wonder what that time was like for her, those 10 years, when she was on her own for not the first time in her life. She was 34 years old, and she was living with her brother while her son was here in the United States. This was the 1970s. This was a time in which international phone calls were expensive and plane travel wasn't common. And she and my father communicated as much as they could through infrequent calls and letters. But she stayed strong so that my dad could stand on his own 2 feet, so that the next generation could do better. So at the age of 15 and a half, my father was summoned to the United States by his aunt and uncle, who we call Daddy and Bari Mummy, shown here. My dad was a dutiful child, and he obeyed the wishes of his elders. He gradually adjusted to his new life in a foreign country, learning the hard way, for example, that the coconut oil in his hair would harden in the chills of the East Coast winter. He made some friends, bagged some groceries, eventually completed his degree at Queens College, and then was off to medical school, where he was on his own for the first time. My dad doesn't talk much about his past, but in my mind, I imagine it was probably more interesting than he's led us to believe. But with the larger decisions in life, my father continued to follow what he considered to be his duties. He worked hard and was successful, and eventually went back to India and married my mother. When my mom was younger, she too followed her duties as imagined by her elders, to take care of her family and community by getting educated and learning how to run a home. But my mom is a big dreamer, and she had dreams of her own. One of the dreams she had was to have a big house, and the other dream was to have a husband who liked to read. She had other dreams too. But she and my dad were married in 1980, and when she arrived with her big dreams and her mother-in-law at my dad's one-bedroom Philadelphia apartment, she spent a not insubstantial amount of time opening doors looking for the rest of the house. But my mom has a strong sense of purpose, and she adapted and evolved with her situation to build her success in her own way. And she was able to do this because of my grandmother's support. My mom has always been a strong woman who is supported by strong women, and she constantly role models this strength and resilience for her children. So my father, mother, and grandmother came to the United States. Knowingly or unknowingly, they had entered a pact together of unified purpose. Together, they created a nurturing, stable household for me and my 2 siblings to grow up in. My grandmother took care of us, her 3 grandchildren, while my parents were able to work and build their careers. We, as her grandchildren, benefited not just from the precious time that we spent with her, but also from seeing how she put her purpose into practice every single day in supporting the family so that the next generation could fly. Because of this and so much more, in her final days, my grandmother profoundly reflected, "Minjidari ma bagicho tevyoai. From one branch, I have created this bountiful garden." She passed away on August 15th, 2020, exactly 73 years after the independence of India. The strong sense of purpose that these 3 people have, my grandmother, my father, and my mother, has shaped who I am, what my missions are, and how my purpose evolves with time. I perceived my grandmother's purpose was to do what was necessary to lift up the family by making sure the next generation had the education to be independent. Growing up, my parents also demonstrated their purpose through their actions. I saw my father every day pouring himself into his work and never being afraid to work the long, hard hours, especially when dedicated to those in need. And this was balanced so beautifully by my mother, who time after time, through every phase, has prioritized her family. She raised 3 kids and cared for 2 elders in her home. And eventually she found great success in her professional life as well. My grandmother, my father, and my mother have separately shown me the importance of education, working hard, putting family first, and dedicating myself to a cause. So my parents and grandmother moved to Sacramento, California, where my parents eventually had 3 kids. I was a happy baby. I was happy to have an older sister. I was happy to eventually have a younger brother. I was happy to be the middle child and fly under the radar for the most part. When I was a child, our parents were in the process of achieving their version of the American dream, and they created a platform for us to be able to achieve the life that they envisioned, with hopes that we would follow in their footsteps and continue on their duties and missions, to be good people, to be a doctor, and to marry a Sindhi. This was another reason why I was grateful for siblings. I trusted that they would be able to fulfill our parents' dreams, because after a certain age, I realized that I probably wasn't going to be able to fulfill all of them. But of course, there are no role models, no positive representation in the media of an Indian American in the 1990s, which was when this was. While we did attend the Hindu equivalent of Sunday school, Bal Vihar, I didn't have any classes with Indian kids until high school, so I constantly felt a little bit out of place. I, of course, didn't feel Indian enough to be in India, and here at home, I didn't quite feel American enough to fit in. My mom was careful to pack us lunches that weren't too aromatic: sandwiches, granola bars, juice, some fruit. But at home, that was a totally different story, because my mom and my grandmother would create feasts from scratch daily. Sai bhaji, fresh yogurt, crispy papad, pula, all of these things were happening on a weekday. I felt like I was, in a way, living in 2 different worlds. At home, I followed our cultures and customs, but at school, that was where I was able to explore who I wanted to become. My passions in school have always been in biology and physiology, even though my academic strengths were more in history and in English. The way I feel about science is the way that I feel my 2-year-old feels about life. I don't know what this is or how it works, but I have to figure it out. But I had passionate science educators who helped me to understand the material, and who ultimately awakened an interest in pedagogy in me that became a through line for my career. I was captivated by biology, and I was so grateful to hear my biology teacher in high school, Mr. K, say, "The best students aren't the smartest students. The best students are the ones that work the hardest." And I could work hard, because I saw my parents do that all the time. So I worked hard in high school, and I did fine. I was never a great student, never a straight A student. I wasn't valedictorian, but I was always around smart people, motivated people, and with their tide, my ship was raised. I was accepted to a few good colleges, and despite my parents' wishes for me to go to UC Davis and stay at home, I decided to go to UCLA. I met some of my lifelong best friends in the first few months of college, and in the excitement of being away from home for the first time, I lost track of the mission that my parents had set out for me in those first 2 quarters. And that mission was to get good grades so I could go to medical school. So in the 3rd quarter of my freshman year, in an attempt to get back on track, instead of taking the recommended 3 classes for that quarter, I decided to pack my course schedule with 5 classes. I thought that I could minimize my distractions by maximizing my course load so that I would be forced to focus and work hard. I was amped up and ready to go and get good grades. So at the end of that quarter, I returned home for the summer. I was tired, of course, but I was happy to be home for a couple of months. One evening at the end of June, I got a text from a friend saying that grades had been posted. I started sweating immediately. It had been a hot day. Sacramento gets pretty hot, but the seemingly relentless sun was starting to go down, and I could hear that the frogs were getting ready for their twilight concertos. The kitchen was bustling, and I could smell that dinner was nearly done, so I snuck away to a quieter place so I could check my grades before sharing the good news. I opened up the webpage with hope, but my optimism quickly transitioned to dismay as I scrolled. A+, great. B+, hoping for better, but I'll take it. A C+, oh no, I thought I did better on that final. And then at the bottom of the webpage, a D+. Time stood still. While I was never a great student, I had never gotten a grade that low in my life. I had failed math. Were my parents right to have wanted me to stay at home and to attend college nearby? Was I on the right path towards living a life of purpose? But wait, what was my purpose anyways? That summer was a long one as I started to question my duties and decisions, but the classes I was taking at the community college nearby were helping me to build my confidence again. My parents were right in a way. Being at home, I had fewer distractions, so I read the books. I did the homework on time. I even went to office hours. I also asked my professors what they loved about teaching, how they landed there, and what they enjoyed about their profession. I returned to UCLA that fall quarter with a more normal course schedule, including repeating the math course that I had failed in the spring. And courses on education also started sneaking their way into my schedule, thus beginning a productive minor in education studies. I felt more confident this time around because I better appreciated the process of learning, the process of education. I also realized the importance of taking my time with the material, on rebuilding better scaffolds around math. That fall quarter, I also had another incredible biology professor, Dr. Phelan, who taught me the importance of having strong frameworks for knowledge. I was learning that it wasn't always about brute forcing, working hard, full speed ahead. It was also about being thoughtful about how things fit together. Once I figured this out, college became easier, and in tandem, I was becoming a better educator. I mentioned my professor, Dr. Phelan, because my teachers have always had a big impact on me. I pick up teaching techniques wherever I go, like a sponge, whether from my algebra teachers, Ms. Swenson or Ms. Maiello, fitness instructors here at Millbury Union at UCSF, or even from artists performing in a public venue. Our educators are truly everywhere. My first teachers were my parents and my grandparents, and my greatest teacher now is my son. So I'd like for all of us to take a moment now, maybe close your eyes, and think about your greatest teachers, the ones that made an impression, an impact on you. Who were they, and why were they effective? I'm guessing something that your teachers had in common was passion and love. And that's what I love most about this job. I get to love and learn every single day. I remember when my 10th grade teacher, AP US history teacher, Mr. Lagomarsino, said to me in passing, he said, I think you'd be a great engineer because of the way that you structure your presentations in a very methodical way. I didn't think much of it then because at that point in my mind, my parents had told me I could be anything I wanted as long as I was a doctor. So it didn't really register. But now that I think about it, I reflect on what he said, I realize the truth in that passing statement. I am someone who needs to build my knowledge structures piece by piece. And while the fire hose of medical school was clearly not going to be a good fit for me, research was. With research, especially basic science research, I could be thoughtful, I could go slow. I could be creative and take some time to think. And even though it may have not been the exact type of doctor my parents were hoping for, at least I was still working towards a doctorate in philosophy. It's no surprise I was attracted to neuroscience. The constellations of neurons in a dish or in a brain slice reminded me so much of the stars in the sky, which I often look to remind myself of the vastness of this universe. My graduate work was rooted in electrophysiology, where I studied, in more ways than one, the space between a stimulus and a response. I was a pretty serious student. Again, I knew working hard was key, and I wasn't afraid to work long hours, working nights and weekends, spending them in the lab. In September 2010, about a year after I started graduate school, I was encouraged by a few friends to attend the graduate student organization elections. I'm not someone who normally gets involved in student government, but that day I thought, why not? I didn't have any experiments set up, I didn't have plans for the evening, and there was a free happy hour afterwards. So I made my way to a tiny room that was packed with graduate students. There were some faces there that I recognized, most that I didn't. But the meeting started anyways. It started with nominations and speeches, and first up was treasurer. There was one person nominated who won by default. Next up was communications officer. This time there were 2 people who were nominated, and there was one person that I recognized. I had met Edward Tuan the previous year when my lab mate, Alfredo, had organized a social at a museum. There were only 4 of us that went, so I spent the evening talking mostly with Ed, losing track of my surroundings, and almost getting kicked out for standing too close to the paintings. But a year later, here he was again, and he was giving a speech that was making everyone laugh, including me. Ed, of course, won by a landslide, but at the end of that election, I knew that I needed to know more about this person. So later at that happy hour, and in fact for all of the seminars and socials that happened over the next few months, I would walk into a room, scan it for Ed, who was usually making somebody laugh, and then figure out a way to corner him into a conversation with just me. One thing led to another, and we started dating, though the beginning was a little tumultuous because I realized that there was no way that Ed was going to pass as Indian. But after a while, I realized that because I knew I wouldn't be able to require the next generation, potential children, to marry anyone in particular, that I might as well follow my heart too. But I was batting at 0 for 2 for the dreams that my parents had for me. And to say that they were disappointed may be the understatement of the year. But I also didn't want to be trapped in someone else's dream. After I told them about our relationship, I decided that I needed space from everything. I didn't talk with Ed or my parents for nearly a full month, which is entirely out of character because I like to call my mom every single day. It was a lonely time, but it was a necessary time. But eventually, I found myself back at Ed's doorstep. And over time, my parents realized that their middle child is stubborn, as Lalchandanis are wont to be. So they tried to approach this alien situation with the growth mindset. And when they finally met Ed in 2012, they welcomed him with open arms, and they haven't really looked back. My parents did a complete 180, and in a big way, the 3 of us finally realized that our duties and our desires are not the same, that they can't be the same. I am a child of immigrants, so I know my culture as an Indian American, but I don't truly know their culture, which is rooted in 1970s India. But suffice to say, seeing this change in my parents changed my perspective too. They showed me that it is never too late to be adaptable and to be willing to grow. So with their blessings, a year later we got engaged, we got married, and we'll be celebrating our 10-year anniversary this fall. And these days, more often than not, I'll find that Ed and my mom take each other's sides during an argument or a discussion. And whenever I go home to my parents' house without Ed, they always talk about him, and they wish that he were there. In fact, the last time I went home, they said, "Don't come back without him next time." My parents took the time to realize that there is a space between a stimulus and a response. And in that space is our power to decide how to proceed, how to grow, and how to allow freedom not just for ourselves, but for those around us. During this time, witnessing my parents' evolution, I also evolved. I took the time to critically examine what I believed in, what I wanted for the world, and whether I was leading my life through those values. As I progressed through my 20s, I was learning that I had to define and chase my own dreams in my own way, regardless of others' expectations for me. As I mentioned before, I've had the great fortune of having some amazing educators in my life, from whom I have slowly built a strong passion for teaching. I mentored, tutored, TA'd from college, graduate school, through my postdoc, but I never had a full-time, long-term position in teaching. But it wasn't because I hadn't tried. In fact, I had applied for Teach for America in my early 20s after college, but due to erroneously thinking that I could teach about the phospholipid bilayer in a 5-minute teaching demo, and my mom praying on the side that I didn't get selected, I understandably didn't make the cut. Ed and I finished graduate school at Georgetown, and then we drove back across the country to California, to the Bay Area, where I continued to pursue research as a postdoctoral fellow. My main project was studying dynorphin, specifically on reversal learning or mental flexibility, some of which is shown here. But clearly my passions in both research and learning were starting to merge. I immersed myself in my postdoctoral research, which started out well. But there's no real end to a postdoc, no completion requirements to fulfill or a degree that I was working towards. And because of a lack of built-in purpose or mission, I soon felt a little lost. My research consumed me and I enjoyed it. And while I was still doing some teaching online, I didn't feel like I was really excelling in either. I felt an itch. I felt there could be something more that I could give the world that was better aligned with who I was and what I loved to do. On the morning of December 7th, 2016, I received an email from a faculty at Foothill College. I had been communicating with her for several months. I had met her for an informational interview, I had shadowed one of her classes, and I was quickly enamored with the idea of being a tenure-track faculty at a California community college because of what they represented to me. In both of our in-person meetings, Dr. Erickson had asked me, casually, if I wanted to teach night microbiology lab the following quarter. I had no experience at all teaching micro, and in fact, I had only taken one course on micro several years ago. So I said no, twice. But that December morning in my inbox was a third request. I do still have that evening micro lab available. If that's something you'd like to try, I'm happy to schedule you in. My instinct was to say no, again. This was not the door that I thought would be open to me. And anyways, I didn't think I was the right person for the job. That evening over dinner, I told Ed about this absurd third request. And he told me, if you want to teach at community college, if this is really your dream, and there are no openings in physiology and anatomy, you have to get your experience somehow. He was right, of course, and so, with my eyes wide open, ready to learn, I decided to walk through that door. It was tough, juggling my research and my teaching. I worked all day in the lab and then drove down to Foothill where I taught for another 3 hours, 7:30 to 10:30, and sometimes it would be midnight by the time I left after cleaning up and answering questions. Sometimes I'd even go back to lab and finish up my experiments for the day, but it didn't matter because teaching gave me life. After just a few weeks of teaching microlab, I realized that I needed to shift gears entirely so that I could allow myself to evolve and redefine my mission, my professional purpose. I wanted to be at a community college. I felt like that's where I needed to be, and so I drew a 90-mile radius around where we lived and scoured job listings constantly. I attended community college fairs, I did more informational interviews, I went to seminars and workshops, and I talked with anyone and everyone that I could about a career in teaching. But in 2017, there were very few community colleges hiring full-time faculty in physiology and anatomy, and I drove 89 miles to Modesto to interview. And while it wasn't really realistic for me to commute there daily, in the hours it took for me to drive there and back for 2 rounds of interviews, I did a lot of thinking, and I was making the commitments that ultimately changed the course of my professional life. I knew most people would think it would be foolish for me to leave a stable, potentially fruitful career in research to pursue teaching, but I finally knew that this is what I had to do. It was springtime, and I remember the smell of the flowers blooming as I drove to and from Modesto with my windows down. It was a really beautiful time of growth for me. And while I wasn't able to land what I thought was my dream job during that application cycle in 2017, I knew at the very least that I had to leave my postdoc and finally commit myself to teaching. I had to pursue the dream that was always there. So with no long-term plans beyond an intention of gaining teaching experience, I gave notice to my boss that I was going to be leaving his lab. It felt foolhardy to leave a job with nothing lined up, but I learned sometimes I need to let go of other people's dreams so that I can find my own. As luck would have it, 1 week after I left my postdoc, Notre Dame de Namur University invited me for an interview. 3 weeks later, they offered me a full-time position, and 1 year later, I landed what was actually my dream job here as a basic science educator at UCSF, where I get to grow with the brightest minds in the world on the regular. Every day, I revel in what a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity this is for me. I work in a place where everyone is always trying to be better. When I forget to ask important questions like, what's best for the student? What's best for their learning? Or what's best for the patients that our students may treat? When I forget to ask those questions, there's always someone there who reminds me of our purpose, of our pride values. So a few years after starting here, I finally felt ready to have a baby. I had wanted to get my career on track first and be at a place where I was stable, where I felt secure. Thankfully, I have incredibly supportive mentors and colleagues, but I still stayed true to myself as someone who is a bit of a procrastinator, and I snuck in a baby right before my 36th birthday. Delivery wasn't easy, but when is it ever? And thankfully, there was nothing out of the ordinary. But I did struggle because I felt like I wasn't being heard about my pain control, or my creeping depression. I've always loved a good protocol, but I found that there is absolutely no protocol for early motherhood or early parenthood. My mind was swirling with all the expectations that I had of myself, I had of others, and others had of me, especially when I came back to work. I took my full 12 weeks of maternity and I tacked on another 4, so my baby was about 4 months old when I came back to work. I had banked a lot of vacation time and I was planning to work part-time when I returned for a bit before returning full-time. I was thrilled to get back to work, back into the classroom, and the first lecture I gave when I came back was very fittingly on reproductive and pregnancy pharmacology. I had such a good time. But the work was piling up too fast to be manageable for part-time hours. I used to be able to handle it, but that was when I had more or less infinite time to devote to my profession. One day, after about a week after I had come back from leave, I was running a little late for my small group session, and I could not for the life of me find parking. I went into a garage, went all the way up, all the way down, tried another garage, and then finally squeezed my car into that tiny spot in the orange level. I sprinted to my small group room, and maybe it was the hormones or maybe it was the fact that I had been running, but I was sweating and spiraling as I thought about how I went wrong that morning. I was late for my small group, but the students were kind, and they even generously offered some suggestions on where to park next time. But once we started working through the material, that day we were talking about antiarrhythmics, I completely forgot about all the stresses of life, all of the stresses of finding parking, or all of the stresses of early parenthood. Everything except for what was going on in that room at that moment just melted away. My passion for my work is a fire I have been tending to for a long time with all of my resources and energy. But I was, and honestly I still am a little bit, unaccustomed to making sacrifices for anything except for work. I expected I'd be able to jump right back in after my leave, as if nothing had changed. But there was so much more that was going on now. There was a lot of stuff that was weighing on me too. I was so fixated, for example, on breastfeeding. I even bought a special baby scale so I could get the data I craved to make a protocol that would finally allow me to have it all. We were making charts and graphs and pivot tables to try to figure out how to put it all together, how to make it all work. But I was burning the candle at both ends. And this eventually exposed the fragility of my mental health postpartum. Late one night, I found myself wandering through the streets of San Francisco, staring at the stars and feeling like I was drifting out to sea. When I eventually came back home, I realized that I needed to evolve yet again. So I found myself in a situation where I can't really just work hard at something and get through it. I have to take the time to redefine my duties in terms of what I need in order to feel secure, but now through the lens of trying to lead a life of balance. My husband recently joked that my approach to work is akin to Vincent's character in Gattaca, who says, "I never saved anything for the swim back." But that approach isn't just impossible, it isn't healthy, and it's definitely not how I'm going to be able to achieve any sort of balance with my new family life. Because in the end, what is it that truly matters? For me, it's my family, it's my friends, it's my community. It's also the people I work with and the missions I work towards. But I need to find a better balance. On many days, I find that I give my all to my work, leaving only the scraps, the leftovers of my best self for my family. And I have to ask myself, is that the right thing to do? In preparing for this lecture, I have learned that we are all works in progress, but every day we get to decide what purpose we are working towards. As I have shared with you through the course of this evening, my purpose has changed with every phase of my life. When I was younger, it was to find my voice and to pursue my passions. And when I was in training, it was to align my passions with my professional purpose. But if I were to reflect on it today, my purpose now is to pursue my personal and my professional life with a more balanced approach and to leave the world a little bit better than when I came. I realize how fortunate I am to have the opportunity to be even thinking about this. And it's all because of what the generations before me have done and what they have sacrificed. And while we may perceive that those that came before us had a unifying purpose that tied their life neatly together, the reality is that everyone's purpose evolves with time. My grandmother's purpose in life wasn't always to enable independence in the generations to follow, but the conflicts of her time dictated that she devote herself to that cause. My father may have not always dreamt of being a physician, and my mother may have not always dreamt of being our family pillar, but they have eventually found lifelong satisfaction in these things. So I'd like to send everyone home with a little work tonight, which is to take some time to think about your goals and your passions and how these may help you serve your greater purpose. And as you all start to consider this, I'd like to invite a few people to share what their purpose is at this time in their life.
Hello everyone, my name is Kaya Patel and I'm a second-year pharmacy student. My current purpose is to excel academically and lay the groundwork for a successful career in pharmacy, all while maintaining my health, relationships, and overall well-being.
Hello, my name is Alexa Tan and I am a staff member in the School of Pharmacy. And my purpose in life is to continuously learn and grow and nurture the meaningful relationships for the people who've shaped me along the way.
My name is Marieke Kroedering. I am also an educator, and I was reflecting on the purpose and work-life balance, and so we were asked for a one-liner, and I promise it's a one-liner about each. Also, in Dutch, I'm from the Netherlands, we are big fans of run-on sentences, so get ready. So thinking about work-life balance, as an educator, there's work, there's life, and then balance. So work, it's always do your best and always be ready to receive feedback because it can always get better. And if you work in a team, focus on the outcome for the team, not whether they take your idea or how it makes you feel. So that's work. Life, one-liner. Never miss an opportunity to enjoy something or have fun, whether that's enjoying a coffee, stealing a kiss, making a bad joke in a meeting or a presentation, or go on a trip, even if that trip initially may not seem to work with your life balance. Never miss out on fun, period. Balance. So how can you work hard and then enjoy hard? So in the Netherlands, we are a very common sense culture. So they have a lot of sayings encapsulating those feelings. And so the saying is, doe maar gewoon, dat is al gek genoeg. Exactly. Which means just act normal. That is crazy enough.
Hi, I'm Rupa Lalchandani, and the purpose of my life has been to do things for my family, extended family, my friends, and extended community, to do things so my mom would be proud of me. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing. So now that we're all starting to think about our purpose, the next question is, of course, how to start working towards achieving it. As for me and my current purpose, which again is to find a better balance between career and family and to leave the world a little bit better, well, for starters, I'm learning how to lean on what I can. For example, I decided early on that I was going to be leaning on some notes as I gave this lecture. But more seriously and importantly, more broadly, I'm currently pushing myself to think beyond myself and to start truly thinking about the people around me. I remember when a college tour guide said, even if there's litter on the floor that you didn't put there, pick it up, because we want to make sure that this campus is beautiful for everyone. I noticed that my dad started picking up trash immediately. And maybe he had always done this, I wouldn't be surprised. But the reality is that we're all in this together. And to me, in that day, it finally clicked. It finally registered. My nanny used to say, even birds can fill their own stomachs, which I interpret as meaning that it's easy for us to look after ourselves and our own, but we must make sure to look after our community too, and to make sure that more people can come to the table and fill their stomachs too. I'm hopeful that the scope of my purpose will continue to expand through my life as my perspective changes and grows. And I know that finding purpose can feel like this really big ephemeral concept, but a concrete thing that I have realized in the past few years that I've been using as a tool for me to achieve my purpose, whatever it is that I have a voice. In fact, we all have a voice. And that voice is stronger than we may realize. You today, right now, in this moment, are someone people look to, people watch, people admire. And I implore us all to take that seriously. I surprised myself when I stepped out of my lane to work on the health equity curriculum. Until then, I had been only focused on basic science topics. But Stephanie Shaw and I saw an unmet need, and now the health equity curriculum is an established curriculum in the School of Pharmacy and the first of its kind in the nation. So one of my goals is to make sure that I use my voice for good and for truth, and I will push myself out of my comfort zone into my zone of proximal development in order to do so. And if we are constantly evolving, then how do we make sure that we still lead a life of purpose despite all of this change? I, of course, don't have the answers, but I'd like to share some of what I've learned so far. Step by step, hour by hour, day by day, we should be making progress towards understanding and evolving our purpose. Our actions and our goals should be driven by this aim, like a North Star. And I'm not talking just about work. Of course, purpose can be found in work, but purpose can also be found outside of work as well. We don't need to always justify our existence through work, to be constantly looking for validation by maximizing our outputs. We need to also remember to be playful, to live in the moment, and to be truly present with the people we're with. And while I'm lucky to have found my passions with relative ease, it has taken a lot of deep reflection for me to start thinking about my purpose. But when I don't know what my purpose is, or maybe my past purpose doesn't fit me quite like it used to, I remember something that my college professor said in one of his lectures in his course, and that is to do good, and be happy. Our purpose can be as simple as that. And this is not new knowledge. In fact, it loosely fits with what Vedic philosophy outlined thousands of years ago as the 3 elements of living a life of purpose. And that is dharma, which is to fulfill our duties, artha, which is establishing security, and Kama, making sure that we enjoy life. So, if I had but one lecture to give, what would I say? I would say, step outside and look at the stars tonight after this lecture. And let's do good, and be happy, and hopefully find our way to a purpose that can launch us collectively to greater new heights. As my mom likes to say, Esa moka virka hamelega. When will a time like this ever come again? So with that, I would like to say thank you. Thank you to my family. Thank you to my husband, who is my guiding light and my North Star. Thank you to my mother, who showed me the importance of family in the first place. Thank you to my father, who has shown me the wonders of committing myself to a cause. Thank you to my friends and family, my mentors, my colleagues, the team that made this possible, Kathy, Kyle, John, Jennifer, and Isaac. I'd also like to thank the students who have given me this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be here, you, the audience, wherever you are, the Marshall family for endowing this lecture, and last but certainly not least, UCSF. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Kaya. Thank you all.